Welcome into episode 12 of Between the Lines, and we finally have our NBA Finals matchup as we have the San Antonio Spurs taking on the New York Knicks. The Spurs taking down the OKC Thunder, the reigning champions, in a classic Game 7 that we are going to remember for years to come. A lot of players stepping up for the Spurs there. We're going to tap into that one a little bit and just go over what we saw there. And then we're going to give you our preview and predictions for the NBA Finals, the Spurs matching up with the Knicks, Game 1 being on Wednesday, June 3rd, back in San Antonio. And then a little bit at the end, we're going to touch on a little bit of NFL news as we had a huge blockbuster trade involving the Cleveland Browns and the Los Angeles Rams. So we'll touch on that a little bit and what we think, just give some of our thoughts on that. So let's start with the Game 7 against OKC, the Spurs and OKC that just happened this past weekend. Let's touch on that first, Tish. And what did you think? What were some of your initial takeaways and just thoughts based on what you saw from the game, just reading the box score and things like that? What stuck out to you from that? What stuck out to you from that, and just like your overall thoughts on that game?
Yeah, first off, kudos to you for predicting the winner for that game. You had the Spurs, so elite ball knowledge there. But I think overall takeaway from the game, a lot to take away. Definitely one of the best game sevens in recent history. We've had some pretty bad game sevens earlier in the playoffs this year, so at least they made up for it in that one. I think the Spurs pretty much kind of like we addressed earlier in our last or maybe two episodes ago. Like if the Spurs wanted to win that series, they really needed their depth and role players to lock in, and that's what we saw. We saw Dylan Harper come through big. Keldon Johnson play some big minutes as well in Game 7. And overall, like the Spurs, it was pretty much like a well-rounded attack. It wasn't like a Wemby masterclass. Like he dropped 22 and 7, pretty good. Like, but for him, that's a pretty tame performance. We saw Julian Champagnie turn into like Klay Thompson Game 6, even though it was Game 7. We saw Stephon Castle play well. Pretty much everyone that needed to like hit their like minimum minutes and like points, like they did that. They played well. And that's pretty much what you want to see from the team going into the finals. You don't want it to be like a bunch of hero ball from Wemby. So we saw Spurs had an all around attack, whereas on the other side, for OKC, I mean, Shea had been playing probably the worst basketball this entire series in like the last probably 4 or 5 years for him. And he kind of like, he shut up some of the haters in Game 7, dropping 35 and 9 pretty efficiently. And that being said, like it was really only him out there. No one else was really contributing. Casey Wallace dropped 17, but that was partially just due to like some last minute scoring in the end of the fourth there. So really, the Thunder definitely look like they miss J-Dub and AJ Mitchell, but even if they were there, don't know if they would have won. So overall, just like taken away from that game, I think the Knicks got to be happy with how their depth and role pieces showed up, and the Thunder need to look maybe to add some depth, move off of some of their key guys in the offseason, maybe pursue someone like Giannis. But what do you think about the game?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said, and I think the biggest part is you said that even if J Dub and AJ Mitchell had played in this game, I'm not really sure. I mean, I think it would made it a little bit closer, but I mean, this is as close of a series as you can get, and the Spurs still won it in 7 games. Like obviously, that's as close as you can get in a series, and I think the Spurs probably would still win this series overall, even with OKC fully healthy. I just think they're a better team, and it played out over the regular season and then during this playoff run. I think a couple things that I wanted to touch on from the game itself. I was really impressed with how the Spurs, and I think the biggest thing with them this season that people have been so concerned about is with their youth and just like their relative playoff inexperience, right? Obviously, De'Aaron Fox and Harrison Barnes being the only guys on the team, and Fox being a starter, but Barnes not playing significant minutes much anymore later in the season into the playoffs. Those guys being the only ones with good playoff experience, and the other guys being completely fresh and new to the playoffs. So I was really impressed with how they were able to handle the moment during this playoffs, especially during that Game 7. They went out to a hot start, especially in the first quarter, right? A lot of good, like getting into the paint, attacking the rim at the beginning of the game. And I think that's it. We're going to talk about Chet Holmgren a little bit, but I also think this probably played into a factor of why Chet didn't play as well. Just the ability that they were able to get 2 feet into the rim every time and just go straight up and attacking Chet, right? And I feel like that probably took down some of his confidence and things like that, which is probably why he wasn't playing that well in the offensive end later in the game. But we'll get back to that later. So yeah, I think their youth was a big factor going into this series, and it played really. They definitely like made that not as big of an issue as a lot of people thought it was going to be. Every time OKC had a big run, they were able to stymie that and get some of their own buckets. Specifically in the end of the first half, SGA was specifically leading a really good run. He played a really good second quarter, not falling around too much, not falling to the ground. He was really staying upright in a lot of his shots, which is what we all want to see. And they were able to cut into that lead, and I think even take the lead going into the close to going into the second half. And then Wemby specifically was able to stymie that and have a lot of good buckets, have a lot of good plays on the defensive end and keep their lead a little bit more and just balloon that lead a little bit up. Similar towards the end of the game, right? It's scores getting close to, I think it's before both teams cracked 100. But it was this was specifically when Wemby got his fifth foul and he was going out. And I agreed with the decision by Miss Johnson to take him out there because of the five fouls. And I thought they should keep him out even longer because Cornette would play pretty well even when he played earlier in the game in the first and second quarter. And then that huge block by Cornette. Like, it's maybe not going to be to the level of block by James. I don't know how block by Cornette sounds. But that was a huge play right there, and definitely a momentum shift there. Because the score, it would have been cut to a 4 point game. I think it was 4 or 6 point game if Isaiah Hartenstein had made that dunk. Cornette gets a huge block there, goes up just straight vertical and pins it against the glass, and then they're able to get a bucket on the other end and increase the lead out to 8, and they were able to just keep that relative distance the rest of the game. Also, De'Aaron Fox, we talked about him being one of the veterans. That really smart foul when the clock was dropping below 20 seconds and the Thunder were looking for a three. That really smart foul before SGA goes up for a shot to get the clock to stop there, and then they had the foul to give. Not anyone else on the floor not knowing that, so he's able to stop the clock there and then get a chance for their defense to reset and everything like that. So that was some of the biggest plays I saw from there. And then finally, let's touch on Chet Holmgren a little bit and just the performance we saw there. That is not the performance you want to see from a guy that you're going to be paying a max extension to pretty soon. I believe his max extension is going to kick in this upcoming year,
Yeah.
and that's really going to be painful for the Thunder salary cap predicament part of this upcoming offseason. You can't have as your All NBA center, a guy's third team All NBA. You can't have 4 points in a Game 7 of Western Conference Finals playoff game. You can't go 1 for 2 from the field and not have a single shot attempt in the second half. You can't be staring down the guy that you're supposed to be the direct rival with and supposed to be the direct competitor when your teams are matching up for the playoffs for the rest of the decade, potentially going to the next decade. You can't just have your center being scared of going against him. You see, everyone's probably seen that one play that was going around on Twitter and Instagram, everything like that, all over social media, where he gets the ball on the right side of the wing. He takes one dribble, he passes it back, and he ends up getting it back, and he like puts up some like ridiculous shot where he ends up falling down, and Wemby's able to cleanly get the ball and then push it down the court for a transition play. So I think that was one of the worst Game 7 performances I think I've ever seen from a guy he's an All NBA player now, right? Obviously with that All NBA selection this year. So what did you make of Chet Holmgren's performance, and or like what did you like not like about his performance? I guess the better way to put it.
Yeah, I guess you can call it a lack of a performance, but yeah, like to me the biggest part was like he shot two like field goal attempts, and I think they were both in the first quarter, if I'm not mistaken. So I mean, like the confidence is like clearly out the window for him. And for someone like you said who's coming off a third team All NBA selection, all defense as well this year, like really not expected. And he was kind of tasked. I mean, he's kind of like even responsible for kind of like inciting this rivalry between him and Wemby, if you want to call it that. It's not really one, but fans like to make it one of these like two unicorns, these like 7 footers that can stretch the floor, do a lot of like guard like play styles. And clearly it was just like the Wemby show. Chet really didn't do anything this whole series. It wasn't even like he sold in game 7. Pretty much the entire series had been very disappointing. So and both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. So I mean, I think it's just not it's a series to forget for Chet. I mean, hopefully he locks in the offseason. Maybe they get things better, but you got to think about, is he one of the guys that gets moved going forward, especially to make contracts work if you want to trade like for a big guy like Giannis? I don't think they're going to move off him just because like he is integral for their defense in most like non-Wemby opponents. But I would say like he really has to like lock in, you know. His spot really isn't as secure and firm as it may have been earlier in the season. He's definitely going to be on the Thunder, but just concerning overall for the unicorn of the OKC Thunder, if you want to say. I think one
Yeah, and I
positive though to take
mhm.
away for the Thunder is I think you got to be pretty happy with how Jared McCain turned out this year for them. He was kind of, especially in the playoffs, he was kind of thrusted into this role of like pretty much playing starter minutes when J-Dub, AJ Mitchell kind of went out all of a sudden, both together. And he may not have had the most efficient nights, but to me, especially, I feel like efficiency in the playoffs isn't really the most important because you know rotation is shortened. You want to see your main guys take a bunch of shots, so it's not too important. It still is obviously, but take it with a grain of salt. So especially if he gets like a whole off season with the system, with the team, with Shea working out together, you know, just like building chemistry, he could really be an integral piece for them, potentially being a starter next year. I think that's one positive if they're out of the many negatives for OKC so far.
Yeah, and think the last thing I want to talk about with Chet Holmgren is that I think specifically with a guy like Wemby and Chet, these are two guys that, especially their type of archetype, this like long, lanky type of center that is able to space the floor and go out to the three. We're not expecting them to be like these type of like gym rat players where you see them as jacked as Lou Dort or things like that. And we're not expecting them to be the types of centers we used to see back in the day in the 90s with Alonzo Mourning and David Robinson and all those types of guys. But at least you've seen with Wemby and his this is his third year in the league. You've seen in these 3 years he's gained a noticeable amount of strength. Specifically, you've seen how he's like become more defined as a player, and he's gained a lot of strength, specifically like in the post and things like that. He's able to get to the rim at a more efficient rate because of how he's getting stronger. I don't think any of us have seen anything develop from Chet in terms of a strength aspect in like not even going back, not even just in his NBA, going back to his time when he was a college player at Gonzaga. Like we haven't seen any like strength develop from him, and that no, not only does it impact him on the offensive end, it impacts him as a defensive player too. There's a reason you were able to see guys like Dylan Harper, Steph Castle, De'Aaron Fox, Devin Vassell, even Julian Champagnie, and obviously Wemby. They were able to get 2 feet in the paint every time and go straight up and vertically attack Chet. And even if Chet's going up straight with his hands up and everything like that, beating 7-footer with his hands up and everything, that's still not as much of a contest because they're able to push him off his spot and things like that. So I think he really needs to develop that physical aspect of his game. I think that's going to help him in the long run. So that's something I think the Thunder need to look at. Is he going to be able to develop that? If not, is that something you want to move off of? Obviously, a guy like Giannis would be a completely different aspect in like the strength aspect of it. You may lose some of the finesse and like the outside shot making, but is that something you want to sacrifice due to the amount of players you have around them? So just a thought on that for the Spurs or for OKC, and a great win by the Spurs in Game 7. So now let's touch on the finals. So we have our matchup set, right? The Knicks versus Spurs, rematch of the last time the Knicks were in the finals in 1999, a lockout shortened season. A lot of similarities in the way that the Spurs were constructed then to the way they are now. They had their young star back then being Tim Duncan, right now being Wemby. They beat the Blazers and the Wolves in that playoff series, in that playoff run in 1999. Obviously, beating the Blazers and the Wolves in this series too, taking down an All NBA big man this year in Chet. Maybe not the All NBA big man that it was in 1999, Shaquille O'Neal, but still a lot of similarities you're seeing. I guess we're gonna have to see the different result this time. But so, what are some of your initial thoughts on the series and just what you think, how you think it's going to play out before we get into our predictions?
Yeah, kind of like it's also cool for that 1999 series where now like Jalen Brunson and Rick Brunson are going to become the first father-son duo to play in the finals for the same franchise. Obviously, Rick Brunson played a whopping 10 seconds in the 99 finals, but I mean, he made it there. Credit to him. Now Jalen Brunson, a bit different, is going to be the star, the alpha of his team. So it's pretty much going to be a question of can the Knicks get it done, or just like the Spurs in 1999 with their 22-year-old Tim Duncan, can 22-year-old Victor Wembanyama get the win for the Spurs? I guess we're going to see. I think it's just interesting, especially this playoffs have really showed that like the regular season matchups don't really mean a whole lot for the playoffs. Things kind of just go out the window when it's the playoffs. It's a whole different like environment and everything. But still looking at the regular season, we saw the Knicks take the series lead in the season, regular season 2-1, one of those being the in-season tournament cup final. Just taking that result with a grain of salt, though, because Wemby was still on its minutes restriction at that time, coming off the bench. So we saw Luke Cornett starting the game there. But overall, pretty even season series. But some things to note are, I think that honestly, and we've been pretty big on the fact that like, oh, the winner of OKC and Spurs is going to be the winner of the entire NBA Finals. And I think I don't want to make the mistake of, for a lot of fans, I don't think it's right to overlook the Knicks because they really do match up pretty well with the Spurs. I feel like they have a lot of, honestly, even more than OKC, a lot of those physical 3-and-D type of wings, obviously, and OG Anunoby seeming like he's fine, not really dealing with that hamstring injury that he had earlier in the playoffs. Got like Mikal Bridges, who started the playoffs off horribly against the Hawks, but then kind of has been on a tear ever since the game 6 in that Hawks series. And then even a guy like Josh Hart, who's always been like the heart and soul of the Knicks basketball for the last few years, doing like all the dirty work, hustle plays. But even he's had like the 3-point shot that they need at times. And obviously Jalen Brunson is Jalen Brunson. And the unique thing about this, the Knicks that I think will be challenging for the Spurs to face is the fact that they haven't really faced a playmaking big like Cat. Honestly, I mean, Cat kind of developed that playmaking sense in this playoffs only, where we saw kind of when they went down that the Hawks series, they kind of wanted to switch things up, and so we saw Cat rather than being like posting up, playing like a traditional big man, kind of stood outside the perimeter and was a playmaker. Like, he had like a triple double, a lot of assists. So I think that's going to maybe cause the Spurs to make some decisions on defense. I don't think they immediately want to have Wemby dragged out of the paint and put him on Cat because that opens up the paint, and that's not really what they want to do. They're best as paint defenders, and they have a lot of other good perimeter guys that can cause trouble for the Knicks on the perimeter. But I think we're going to see a guy like Wemby probably start guarding Josh Hart like he did in the in-season tournament final, where he's pretty much going to be daring Josh Hart to shoot because you still want Wemby to kind of sag off, be that paint presence, but at the same time, you can't obviously leave a guy that open. But I think Josh Hart is probably the only guy in that starting five that doesn't have the most lethal, consistent 3-point shot. So if Josh Hart's going to start knocking down those threes, then you're going to have to see them switch the matchups up. But I think maybe it's going to be a pretty interesting game plan where I think the Spurs, you'd think, oh, just match the bigs up, Cat and Wemby, the two 7-footers, but I don't think that's really the smartest thing to do. And then on the other side of things, I think the Spurs, a challenge that they pose for the Knicks is the Knicks, obviously they've been on a tear. They've won 11 games in a row. The big narrative is they're going to have a lot of rest going into this series where they haven't played a game in 11 days. Meanwhile, the Spurs are coming off a 6-game series, a 7-game series, so a lot of wear and tear, a lot of big minutes for young guys like Wemby and the crew. So is the fatigue gonna, be a problem? I could see the Knicks causing problems in games 1 and 2 just because they've had that rest. But at the same time, we've seen like too much rest kind of have like diminishing returns, get rusty, whereas like Wemby's been playing. We saw it in game one, Cavs versus the Knicks, where I mean the Cavs they choked the lead, but they still got up pretty big. So I think overall we're in for a pretty good series. I like how both teams match up with each other. I think the Spurs have a lot of good perimeter defenders, especially like Steph Castle, Julian Champagnie, who's emerged. Uh, Even like Devin Vassell can cause chaos out in the perimeter. Obviously, Wemby doing his thing in the paint, perimeter, wherever you need him to be. And then the Knicks, on the other hand, they have a lot of good perimeter defenders as well. OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, some good bench guys as well. Pretty deep team overall. We're gonna see if Mitchell Robinson ends up playing with that broken right pinky. Think everything's pointing towards he will play. I mean, it's the finals, and he's a tough competitor. I wouldn't expect anything less from him. But that was a lot of yap. What do you think about this matchup that we have on our hands?
I think I agree with the most everything you were saying. I think it's definitely going to be a good series. I definitely see this series going at least 6 games. I mean, it would be great if we can get a seventh game again. I think these two teams would give us an awesome 7-game series. But I think it's going to be a long series. And I think the one thing you mentioned, it's the common debate that we see. I think we see this a lot in football too, specifically. We see this with teams that rest their starters in week 18, or like, do they get the first round bye in the playoffs and go into the divisional round? We talk about rest versus rust. Like, are you better off having a lot of rest and giving your players a lot of time to get back and get some rest together and like get healthy and things like that, or is it better to have your guys in game shape and have them more in a rhythm? So it's something we're gonna have to see going into this series. The Spurs would be the epitome of just like not having rest. They're going to be coming off a Game 7 war that they just played, and really one competitive series even before that with just the Timberwolves series versus the Knicks. We're going to be coming off 2 straight sweeps, and they haven't had to deal with any resistance really other than that Game 1 against the Cavs where they had that huge comeback. So I think biggest thing that I want to touch on, and first thing I want to mention is you were talking about Cat and his ability to be a playmaker, and just backed up by the stats. Like last postseason, he was averaging 1.3 assists per game, right? So that was in the 3 series they had last year. This postseason, averaging 5.9, so 6 assists per game. So he's almost like quadrupled that number of assists that he's dishing out per game, and not even just like the assists, like the hockey pass, making the pass that goes to the pass. Just the ability for him to work at the top of the key and things like that, and let players get movement outside or get moving like under the rim, get moving to the wings and the corners and things like that, and letting the whole team space out the floor. That's also letting Jalen Brunson not have as much usage, right? Taking the load off of his plate and making sure that he's able to be more fresh when it comes to clutch time because they know they're going to need him then. I think the biggest thing that I want to touch on here is specifically the matchup, how they're going to guard Wemby, right? Obviously, that's what every team is going to be concerned with for the foreseeable future. I mean, I think what the stats have been showing, what the Knicks have done in previous games. Obviously, the Knicks won the season series against them 2-1, winning the one of the games being the NBA Cup game, NBA Cup final game. And I think what the biggest thing they're going to do is going to put OG Anunoby on Wemby and see how that can disrupt his rhythm. So I saw this stat on Twitter. Shout out to Caitlin Cooper, right? She was the Twitter user that had that out there. So there's been 20 players that have guarded Victor Wembanyama for at least 100 half-court possessions, right? Or at least 100 half-court matchups since he's been in the NBA. So the fewest points per 100 matchups that anyone has had, the Wemby has had against any of these players has been OG Anunoby, right? So in these 3 years that Wemby's been playing in the NBA, his hardest matchup based on the half-court matchups and points per possession in these half-court matchups has been OG Anunoby. And specifically because of his build and everything like that, right? He's a 6'7" in his height, 240, he's 7'2" wingspan. So he's really going to be able to disrupt Wemby, right? Disrupt his base and things like that. Obviously, Cat's going to have to do a part in that. And I think Cat, mostly on the offensive end, is going to have to be able to stretch Wemby out. Are they going to stick him onto a guy like Josh Hart maybe and like not allow him to be on the perimeter as much so that'll be able to keep him in the paint? But if they can have Cat on Wemby, specifically when Cat's on offense, can he bring him out of the paint and do that specifically with the shooting, right? We know Cat's a really talented big man shooter. Can he make sure he stays consistent with that? We've seen in a couple series, like in the past specifically, catch shooting has kind of dropped. He can't have that happen in this series. Otherwise, it's going to give Wemby a reason to just sag off and guard the paint. And we obviously the Knicks aren't going to want that. The last thing you touched on, the Mitchell Robinson injury of the right pinky finger. I've seen a lot of people say this. This isn't something that's unique from either of us, but if there's any player in the NBA, and specifically on the Knicks, that is going to have a right pinky injury, even for a right-handed shooter, it's probably Mitchell Robinson. You're not really looking to him for his shooting prowess or anything like that. Obviously, his free throws have been a problem, and this is definitely going to probably could affect that even more. Right, you don't really use the pinky too much when you're shooting, but it's still on his dominant hand when he's shooting. So I think that's something that could be affected. Are they going to go? Is Mitch Johnson going to choose to go into the hack and Mitch strategy? Or are they going to do something like that when he gets in the game? But I think you're going to see Mitchell Robinson play. It's the finals. Like I don't think he's going to give it all he's got and make sure he can cut it out. So I think you're going to expect to see him to play. I think it's important to see how do they work their big man rotation. Do you even see a guy like Ariel Hukporti come in for a little bit if Mitchell Robinson isn't playing as well? Do you give some Hukporti minutes just to give Cat some rest, or do you end up going small? Right? We talked about previously in the OKC series when Wemby was off the floor. Do we want to see them go small? So almost the reverse. When Cat's off the floor, do you want to go reverse of that? Maybe put OG Anunoby at your center, or even a guy like Josh Hart. He's not as like physically like well built as like OG Anunoby is. That's why they're putting him on Wemby most of the time. But could you see some things like that? So I think just a couple interesting matchup tactics that the Knicks could do, right, to change up the thing and just make sure like Wemby's not seeing the same defensive matchup every single time. But those are some of my thoughts. I think we both have similar thoughts, and I think it's going to be a really good series. But we were both unsure on who we're picking, right? We didn't talk about this before, so I'm gonna give you the floor right now. Who's your pick for the NBA Finals, and who's taking the Larry O'Brien Trophy home?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a tough pick. I wasn't trying to overlook either team. The easy pick would be the Spurs because they're favored, but I truly did consider everything. But that being said, I still am going to go rock with the Spurs in six here. I think honestly, the fact is that the Knicks, they've, as historic as this postseason run has been, now they own like the record for the biggest point differential across any 11 game span in the playoffs of all time. A lot of that has come from their like red hot 3-point shooting from beyond the arc. And pretty much all those series, they've been shooting electric numbers from beyond the arc, just like a guy like Landry Shamet, who went, I think, 12 for 13 from three in the last series, missing one shot. They have a lot of good 3-point shooting, but the problem is, I think the Spurs do have a lot of good perimeter defenders to neutralize that 3-point shooting. Obviously, it's a bit different with cat playmaking to help get guys open, but the Spurs, I believe, they have the third lowest allowed 3-point shooting percentage in the playoffs. So if they can neutralize the Knicks' main point of attack, that's been the case for the last few series. And I think they're gonna have problems, like going forward, finding ways to score on this tough Spurs defense, which they haven't faced a defense nearly as physical and tough as the Spurs that they have compared to any other team. They face the Hawks, the Sixers, the Cavs. None of those teams have like a potent defense to be scared of going into. So I think the Spurs, I already said a lot of the things earlier. So just to summarize, I think the Spurs have probably the best play in the world right now. I think almost unanimously, in my opinion. They have a lot of depth, and the Knicks do have a lot of depth as well. But I think the Spurs, if they can neutralize the Knicks' main point of attack, then I think we're going to see the Spurs win this series in 6 games. And that's not even me taking it to six, just like out of wishful thinking, me wanting a good series. I truly do think the Knicks are good enough to. The way I see the series going down is probably they take one of the early games in San Antonio just because of like benefiting from extra rest. And then I think they steal one of the games 3 and 4 at home. I mean, that like MSG home court advantage is like the best home court advantage in arguably all of sports. And the Knicks they're electric at home. They have one of the best home records in the entire NBA. So I think I'm going to take the Spurs in six here. What's your pick?
I'm gonna be rocking with the opposite of what I've picked most of the series this season. Every single playoff series where the Spurs have been in, I've picked the Spurs. This is the one time I'm gonna go with, so we'll see if it bites me this time. But I'm gonna be taking the New York Knicks to win it all. I'm gonna take the Knicks in 6 games. So same as you, I think it's going 6 games. And just like you mentioned, it's not out of a wishful thing. Like I want this series to be longer. I definitely think this is going 6 games. I expect it to be 2-2 after the first 4 games. Right, I think we're gonna have a 2-2 going into Game 5. But that's what I think is going to happen. But I really could see it being 3-1 Knicks even after 4 games, just solely because I think this MSG home crowd is going to be really raucous, going to make sure it's hard for the Spurs young players, right? They've never played in that type of like playoff environment, especially on the road, right? You can say as much as you want, OKC does have a good home crowd, especially for a small fan base. It really is a good home crowd, but there's nothing like the Garden for a playoff game, specifically the Garden for a final game, for an NBA Finals game. So I'm gonna take the Knicks to win in 6 games. I think it's probably gonna be 2-2 after the 4 games, but I could see even 3-1 Knicks. And I think if it's 2-2, the Knicks are gonna take the next two. 3-1, I think San Antonio would probably take Game 5 on their home floor, and I think the Knicks would close out in six. Um, I mean, I could see it going both ways. We mentioned how close like we think the series is gonna be, but I mean, I don't see. I feel like the Knicks just they're it seems like it's a lot of like the sports gods types of thing. It's a lot of things are going their way this season. You just have it could be like different. Maybe they haven't played as much competition as the Spurs have seen in the West. Could that be something that bites them during this playoff run? But even if it is, I think it might just be something that hurts them in one of their first 2 games, and then they're able to adjust to that. So we'll see what happens. But I'm going to be taking the Knicks to win this series in 6 games.
Yeah, I mean, we have different picks, but ultimately we're both hoping for the same thing, a good series, just some good basketball to wrap off the season before we go into the dreaded off season of all sports. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
All right, so the last thing we want to touch on in our episode today is a Blockbuster NFL deal that just went down earlier today. So it actually went down right before we started recording the episode, so we want to touch on that a little bit. The Browns. So the Browns are sending new NFL season sack leader, right? Myles Garrett, the Defensive Player of the Year, to the Rams for Jared Verse, their young starting edge rusher, a 27 first, a 28 second, and a 29 third. I think our initial reactions to the trade. We didn't know the later part of the trade compensation, the 28 second and 29 third, until a few minutes ago. But we initially saw it was going to be just one first and some other draft compensation. I think at that time we were like, okay, that it seems like the Browns didn't get enough. I think this guy's probably worth a little bit more than just one first round pick. Even with the second and third being in there, that's good. You were able to get more picks, but I still think the Browns sort of got fleeced in this deal in terms of the draft compensation they were able to receive. We've heard Myles Garrett talk about in the past, like he wants to win. He wants to win a championship. He wants to play for a contender and things like that. But his actions in the past haven't really like spoken in that. Obviously, we saw him make a lot of that noise last offseason, specifically wanting to get out of Cleveland, and then he was just able to sign there once they were able to give him a max contract. So, what are your thoughts on what are your takeaways from the trade initially? And how do you see that changing specifically the landscape of the NFC West and the NFC overall?
I mean, yeah, like pretty much, in my opinion, the most like all-in trade I've ever seen for a team. Like with Matthew Stafford having maybe this being his last year, he just signed that extension to get 50 mil a year. Pretty much the Rams just want to go all in, which at first they were like, they drafted Ty Simpson. So it was like, okay, maybe Stafford is like, he's here for another year or two to be a mentor, like a bridge quarterback, but clearly not. They're going to win now. They get Myles Garrett, who, as much as I dislike him just for, division rival reasons and all that for my Steelers, he's arguably the best edge rusher in all of football right now. And pretty much not really much more you can ask for, especially given the fact that in terms of draft capital, they didn't have to give up a whole lot to get him. They did give up Jared Verse there, talented young edge rusher from Florida State who won Defensive Rookie of the Year last year or 2 years ago. But I don't know. I was expecting like we saw Deshaun Watson get traded to the Browns for 3 first round picks. Like Deshaun Watson for crying out loud. Here you have Myles Garrett, who's like a two-time decoy, just broke the sack record last year, like you said. He's getting traded for an edge rusher who, if you want, you could equate to a 1st round pick, sure. And then another 1st round pick, and then just like some second and third picks. So I mean, I thought the Browns could have definitely gotten more for Myles Garrett, especially him being like their franchise guy, someone you could even argue is probably the best player in their franchise history, maybe except for like Jim Brown. So I don't know. The Rams, like they're clearly going all in. This is kind of like reminding me of their 21 season where they traded for like Odell Beckham Jr. mid-season. They're going to go all in that year and they won the ring. So we'll see what happens if they win this year. Obviously, they've gone also got Trent McDuffie this year. So in my opinion, they better win now because they're not going to have a valuable 1st round pick, 2nd round pick for a couple of years here. So yeah, how much help does Matthew Stafford need, man?
Yeah, and I think especially for the Browns too, looking at it, yeah, you were able to get a guy that's effectively, I mean, is a first round talent in Jared Verse, and he's a really good player, really good young player. He's going to be a starter for them for a long time coming. And then you have that another second round pick in 2027. But I mean, the way the Rams are looking at it, that's probably going to be the 32nd pick or the 31st. They're hoping it's going to be one of the later round picks. How helpful is that? That's effectively turning into almost a second round pick for them. And same thing with their second round picks and third round picks is going to be towards the end of those rounds of the draft. So I think just the fact that you weren't able to get more compensation, I think because the picks aren't going to be that great, you have to really fight and making sure you're getting more compensation. You want to make sure it's going to be something that's actually worth it in the quantity of it, since the quality of the picks aren't going to be that great. So, and I think also in the terms of the Rams and looking at it on the NFC side of things, I think this really creates like a type of thing where, like you mentioned it, the Rams are really going all in on this year. If it doesn't work out for them, you're going to have a lot of cap questions, a lot of salary questions, a lot of retirement questions, specifically Stafford isn't going to be coming back. Obviously, they drafted Ty Simpson with their first round pick predicting or preparing for the future and then making this move all in. So it's like giving a little bit of like the two timelines type of thing the Warriors have tried to do so long with like Steph Curry recently. Um, it's just I think this really creates a big division in the NFC. I think they're clearly the first team there. Obviously, the Seahawks winning the Super Bowl this past year, but I think this clearly puts them above them. And then you see like sort of that second tier. You see the Seahawks in there, maybe within that second tier, a little bit of a separation. The Seahawks will be at the top, and then maybe you see the teams like the Eagles, you see the Packers, things like that. So I think the Rams they really can't sell this golden opportunity they've been given this year, and it's not a golden opportunity because it's like injuries and things like that. They've made this a good opportunity, but they do have to capitalize on this and make sure that they can actually get the outcome they want and win the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, I think like and like you mentioned the Seahawks there. I think now like both teams are kind of trending in opposite directions. Not like the Seahawks have had some like major fall off, but I mean they lost Kenneth Walker, the Super Bowl MVP, and then one of their best corners in Tariq Woolen. So on the other hand, now the Rams, they're just looking at their roster. They have the reigning MVP. They have one of the best running back duos in the league in Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. They have the best wide receiver duo in the league in Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. They have one of the best secondaries in the league with Trent McDuffie, Manuel Forbes, Quentin Lake, some of those guys. And then now they have probably the best edge rusher duo up there with like the Texans, where they now have Myles Garrett, obviously, Braden Fisk on the line, and then even a guy like Byron Young last year who got double-digit sacks. So clearly, if the Rams don't win this year, something's going wrong. You know, if it isn't because of injury reasons, pretty much to me, like they have to be the heavy favorite to come out of the NFC this year. But we'll see. The NFL is weird. You know, things happen. But yeah, we'll see what happens this year.
So I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. So hopefully we'll have potentially some instant reactions coming down for the first couple games of the NBA Finals. And then I think around our next episode time, we would have at least the first two games done, potentially a third game done. So we'll give our breakdown of what we've seen so far and what we plan to see in the next couple games. So thanks for listening.